right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at the top 10 richest women in the world as of late 2024.
Wow.
We've got rankings, articles, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's always it's fascinating to see like a snapshot of, global influence because these women represent major industries and philanthropic forces.
Right. And, these rankings, they can fluctuate, but it's a great way to kind of understand the landscape, how wealth is generated, how it's wielded in the 21st century. So
absolutely.
Let's start unraveling these stories. And I think to get a better sense of the bigger picture, I think it's helpful to group them by themes. So
yeah, and it's worth noting right off the bat that a lot of these women inherited their wealth, which immediately raises questions about, generational wealth and the impact it has on global economies.
So let's start with those who represent like these powerful family dynasties.
Okay.
First on the list, we've got Françoise Bettencourt-Meyers from France, and her net worth is estimated somewhere between $90 to $100 billion. Wow.
That's a lot of zeros.
A lot of zeros.
Yeah, and it comes from the L'Oreal Cosmetics empire.
Oh, yeah.
A company founded by her grandfather. And, think about it. Most of us have probably used L'Oreal product at some point.
Oh, for sure.
That's how vast their reach is.
It's incredible. Like a single family building a global brand like that. And next we have another inheritor of a massive company, Alice Walton from the USA.
Okay.
Her family, of course, founded Walmart.
Yeah.
And her net worth is estimated to be somewhere between $60 and $70 billion.
Wow. And Walton's story is interesting because it goes beyond just retail.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a major art collector. In fact, her collection is so big, she has her own museum.
That's amazing. I mean, that's such a fascinating detail.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how that appreciation for art might influence, her other endeavors, whether it's in business or philanthropy.
Absolutely. It suggests that even within these massive family businesses, there's room for individual passions and pursuits to shape how that wealth is used.
Sticking with family businesses, next up we have Julia Koch.
Okay.
Also from the USA.
Yeah.
Also with a net worth estimated between $60 and $70 billion.
Wow.
And her wealth comes from Koch Industries.
Yeah.
Which is one of the largest privately held companies in the United States.
Koch Industries is huge. It's this sprawling conglomerate involved in everything from oil refining to paper products. I mean, it's really interesting how the decisions made within these family-controlled companies can really have a ripple effect throughout so many sectors of the economy.
Yeah, it's a good reminder of how intertwined these fortunes are with the global economy.
Absolutely.
All right, so now let's talk about Jacqueline Mars.
Okay.
Also from the USA, with a net worth estimated between $35 and $40 billion.
Okay.
Her family founded Mars Incorporated.
A candy company.
The candy company.
Wow.
Some of the world's most iconic candy brands. I mean, you think about it, like this is a classic example of how like a consumer product, in this case candy, can generate such enormous wealth over generations. I mean, these brands are recognizable all over the world. Yeah. It just shows you the power of a well-built brand, I think.
And it makes you wonder how, these family businesses navigate global markets and consumer trends over time. You know?
Totally. Like, do they adapt? Do they stick with tradition?
Right.
It's a complex.
It must be a tough
balancing act.
Balancing act, yeah.
So next we've got Miriam Adelson. From the USA, with a net worth estimated between $30 and $35 billion.
All right.
And she inherited this stake in the Las Vegas Sands casino and resorts empire.
Oh,
from her late husband.
So another example of inherited wealth, but this time from a very different kind of industry.
Totally, like the world of casinos and entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. It just shows you how diverse the sources of these fortunes can be. But, the common thread here is, the passing down of assets through families.
Yes.
And how that shapes not only individual wealth, but, the dynamics of entire industries.
Okay, so we've seen several examples of inherited wealth within family businesses.
Right.
Let's shift gears slightly and look at someone whose fortune is tied to, a more recent tech empire.
Okay.
Mackenzie Scott, also from the USA, has a net worth estimated between $30 and $35 billion.
Wow.
And her wealth comes from her divorce settlement.
Oh, right.
With Amazon founder Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, her situation is so interesting because it highlights how the creation of, a tech giant like Amazon,
yeah,
can result in such vast wealth in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and it brings to light the whole, the complexities of wealth acquired through divorce, which is a scenario we're seeing more and more among absolutely ultra-wealthy.
Yeah, and it's what Scott has chosen to do with that wealth that has really captured the world's attention.
Exactly.
Because unlike, some of the more traditional approaches to philanthropy, Scott's been giving away billions at an unprecedented rate. She's focusing on smaller organizations and causes.
Yeah, it challenges those conventional notions of philanthropy. It sparks this broader discussion about how wealth can be used for social good.
Yeah, like, is it better to create, lasting institutions like foundations, or is Scott's more immediate and widespread approach more effective? These are questions, we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a completely different model than what we've seen from some of these other women on the list. So it's clear that while inheritance plays a significant role, it doesn't necessarily dictate how they manage or utilize their wealth.
That's a really crucial point.
Okay, so let's move on to someone who built her fortune in a very different sector. Gina Reinhart from Australia. Her net worth is estimated between $25 and $30 billion.
Wow.
And it's derived from her company, Hancock Prospecting, which is heavily involved in mining and resources.
So this brings us to another key theme we're seeing, right?
Yes.
The global distribution of wealth.
Yeah.
Reinhart's story highlights, the economic power of the mining industry, particularly in resource-rich countries like Australia.
Then it raises all those questions about sustainability and environmental impact of these industries. How do these women, whose fortunes are tied to these large-scale operations, how do they navigate those complex issues?
Yeah, that's a discussion that needs to happen alongside any analysis of their wealth, for sure.
Yeah, it's a great point. So far, we've seen how family businesses, tech empires, natural resources have all contributed to the creation of these vast fortunes.
Yeah.
But what about those who are actively running companies, making decisions that shape the global economy on a daily basis?
That's an important distinction. Let's move on to someone who exemplifies that.
Okay.
Suzanne Klatten from Germany. She has a net worth estimated between $20 and $25 billion.
Okay.
She inherited a stake in BMW.
Oh, wow.
But she's also diversified her investments and is, considered a highly successful business leader in her own right.
So while inheritance provided that foundation, she's actively built upon it.
Right. She's not just, a passive recipient of wealth.
Right.
She's really shaping things.
And this brings us to another woman whose story highlights the global nature of wealth creation.
Okay.
Iris von Bona from Chile also has a net worth in that $20 to $25 billion range.
Wow.
And her fortune comes from mining and beverages.
Interesting.
Inherited from her late husband.
So it's interesting to see how diverse these industries are that contribute to this level of wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, from cosmetics and retail to mining, casinos, tech. Right.
It seems like there are paths to immense wealth in almost every sector.
Absolutely. And finally, we come to Abigail Johnson.
Okay.
From the USA, also with a net worth estimated between $20 and $25 billion. But what sets her apart is that she's the CEO of Fidelity Investments.
Yeah.
One of the world's largest asset management firms.
Yeah.
So unlike many on this list who, inherited their positions, Johnson's actively running this massive company, making decisions that impact global financial markets.
It's an important distinction to make. It shows that, while inheritance might play a role for many, it's not the only path to this level of wealth and influence. Johnson's story really showcases the power of strong leadership and strategic decision-making within the financial sector.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of power than, say, inheriting a stake in a family business.
Yeah.
So we've seen a range of backgrounds and industries represented in this first look at the top 10.
What strikes you as the most significant takeaway so far?
I think what stands out to me is this interplay between inheritance and active wealth creation.
Yeah.
Many of these women inherited their initial wealth, but they've also made choices.
Right.
Some have stuck with family businesses, others have diversified,
Yeah.
and still others have, taken on leadership roles in entirely different sectors. It demonstrates that while starting with significant capital provides certain advantages,
Right.
it doesn't dictate the trajectory of one's wealth or influence.
That's a good point.
Yay!
Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how these women, sitting atop these massive fortunes, choose to navigate the world of business and philanthropy. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
It really isn't. And, if we zoom out a bit, it's worth noting that this list, while impressive, it only represents a tiny fraction of the world's wealthiest individuals. I mean, there are many other women and men who hold, immense wealth and power.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
This is just a glimpse into a much larger and more complex system.
Right.
But I do think it offers, some valuable insights into how wealth is generated, managed, and ultimately what kind of impact it can have in the world.
And one aspect I think we haven't fully explored yet is this idea of responsibility.
Yeah.
Does having immense wealth, come with an obligation to give back to society?
Yeah.
And if so, how do these women approach that responsibility?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries. I mean, some believe that philanthropy is like a moral imperative for the wealthy, while others argue that they should be free to do as they please with their money.
Right. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth looking at how the women on this list have chosen to engage with philanthropy.
Right.
We've already mentioned Mackenzie Scott's unconventional approach.
Yeah.
But there are others who have made, significant contributions as well.
Like Françoise Bettencourt-Myers, for example, is known for her support of scientific research and the arts.
Yeah.
And Alice Walton, beyond her art museum, has also donated to educational initiatives.
And then you have someone like Julia Koch, who's become, a prominent figure in the world of political donations.
Oh, yeah.
Her involvement raises questions about, how wealth can be used to influence political outcomes, which is a topic that often sparks intense debate.
It's definitely a reminder that philanthropy isn't always purely altruistic, right?
Right.
It can be intertwined with, personal interests, political agendas, even business strategies.
And it's not just about what they give to, but also how they give. Some like Scott favor a more direct and decentralized approach, while others prefer to establish foundations or work through, established charitable organizations.
It's almost like there are different schools of thought when it comes to effective philanthropy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how these women are kind of experimenting with different models.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the question of transparency.
Yeah.
Some are very open about their giving, while others are more private. It raises questions about accountability and whether there should be greater public disclosure of philanthropic activities.
Transparency is definitely a hot topic these days, especially when it comes to the ultra-wealthy.
Yeah.
People want to know where the money's going, what impact it's having.
Yeah, and rightfully so. There's a growing demand, I think, for accountability, not just in terms of financial transparency, but also in terms of, the social and environmental impact of these fortunes.
Speaking of impact, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the role of women in leadership positions.
Okay.
We've seen several examples on our list of women who are actively running companies, making decisions that have, global repercussions.
Abigail Johnson as CEO Fidelity Investments immediately comes to mind. I mean, her position in the financial sector is incredibly influential.
And we also have Suzanne Clatton, who's taken an active role in managing and growing her investments beyond just her inherited stake in BMW.
Right.
These women are challenging this traditional notion that, leadership in business and finance is a male-dominated domain.
Yeah.
Their presence at the top of these companies is a sign of progress. But there's still a long way to go in terms of achieving true gender parity.
It's a good reminder that while we're seeing more women in positions of power, there's still systemic barriers that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And it's not just about numbers, right? It's about creating an environment where women can thrive.
Right.
And bring their unique perspectives and leadership styles to the table.
I think that's a crucial point. Diversity in leadership isn't just about fairness. It's about tapping into a wider range of talent and ideas, which ultimately benefits everyone.
Exactly. And if we look beyond, the individual stories, there's a bigger conversation to be had, I think, about the role of wealth and power and shaping the world we live on.
Right.
These women, whether through their businesses, their philanthropic activities, or their leadership positions, are wielding significant influence.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what kind of legacy they'll leave behind. Will their wealth be used to create positive change, or will it simply perpetuate existing inequalities?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that we can't answer definitively today.
Yeah.
But I do think By understanding their stories, by analyzing their choices, and by engaging in thoughtful dialogue, we can start to envision a future where wealth is used more responsibly and equitably.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
We've talked about family dynasties, self-made empires, philanthropy, the impact these women have on the global economy.
And we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
These 10 women represent a much larger trend, the increasing concentration of wealth and the growing influence of women in shaping, the 21st century.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
Well, first, I think it's important to recognize that, wealth creation isn't a monolithic thing.
Yeah.
We've seen how it can come from diverse sources, inheritance, entrepreneurialism,
right,
different industries, even divorce settlements.
Yeah, it's definitely not as simple as just like being born rich or striking it lucky.
Right.
There are complex forces at play.
Yeah.
And these women's stories really illustrate that.
Absolutely.
Second, I hope the listener comes away with a more nuanced understanding of philanthropy.
Yeah.
It's not just about writing big checks, right?
Yeah.
It's about strategy, impact, and even, personal values. Mackenzie Scott's approach, for example, has really shaken up that traditional model of philanthropy.
Absolutely.
It's made people think differently about how wealth can be used for social good.
Yeah. And finally, I think it's crucial to acknowledge the rise of female leadership in business and finance. The women on this list aren't just figureheads. They're making decisions that affect global markets and industries.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that the landscape of wealth and power is changing.
Yeah.
And while there's still a long way to go in terms of gender equality, these women are really paving the way for future generations. It's been a fascinating journey exploring these 10 stories. But as you said earlier, this is just a snapshot.
Right.
What would you say to our listener who wants to continue exploring this topic on their own?
I would encourage them to think critically about, the sources of information they encounter. Wealth rankings are interesting, but they don't tell the whole story.
Right.
Dig deeper into the industries these women represent, the companies they lead, and the impact their decisions have on the world.
And don't just focus on the numbers.
Yeah.
Look for the human stories behind the wealth. What are their motivations? What are their challenges? What kind of legacy do they hope to leave behind?
Those are questions worth pondering. Not just about the ultra-wealthy, but about our own relationship with wealth and power, regardless of our own financial circumstances.
That's a great point. We all have a role to play in shaping a more equitable and just world.
Absolutely.
Whether we're managing billions or just trying to make ends meet.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging in these important conversations.
Well said. And that wraps up another deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.